Okay, people are slowly joining here. Welcome, Diane. Good to see you tonight. And we've got some storms here around the Gampa Center, so might want to give everybody a couple extra minutes to safely get to the center and get in. So we'll be starting pretty soon. John is here and raring to go. And got Jennifer just joined us. Welcome, Jennifer. Hello. All right. And everybody's popping in now.
Good evening, and welcome to the fifth and last class of Buddhism in a Nutshell. So happy you guys could get here, braving the rain tonight, and welcome online. I can see you on this monitor right here. And if I remember to look at the camera, I might too. But if I'm looking over that way, just remember I'm looking at you. Okay, so let's start with a very short meditation just to kind of help calm our minds and also think about a motivation. So one of the traditional ways to begin a practice in Buddhism is to check in with the reason we're doing things. Okay, so just sit comfortably and no need to worry about the specifics of the posture, but in general, it's helpful to have the back kind of a little straighter than usual, but also relaxed. Feet either on the floor if you're in a chair or crossed if you're on the ground, and hands in the lap. So now just go ahead and take 2 or 3 nice deep breaths. So now go ahead and think about your reasons for being here tonight. Your reasons may be for taking an interest in Buddhism in general or a spiritual path in general. Like, what is it you're looking for? What are you hoping to accomplish? And the tradition in the Mahayana system, one of the main types of Buddhism, is to expand the motivation that we have already and challenge ourselves to also bring in our own liberation from suffering and our own development of compassion so that we can be of perfect benefit to all the others around us and help them become free of suffering too. So whatever that motivation is that you started with, it's said to be a lot more powerful if you can extend it to those things too. Okay, so you can bring your attention back to the room now. So good to see everybody. All right, so here are our topics for tonight. We have about the same number of topics as usual, but I think they're going to be a lot shorter because they're a little bit more difficult to try to explain. So I won't try for too long. And I'd love to leave some time for a review at the end. So we'll try to do a short review where we kind of focus on why we talked about each thing and, how does it relate to our experience. So that it could be more than just the terminology and the lists and things like that. So our first topic is called calm abiding. And one way to describe it is it's kind of like perfected concentration. So if you develop your concentration to its fullest extent, so you're capable of really maintaining the focus on whatever object you choose and having that focus be really stable and also really precise in the sense of recognizing when you've wandered away from it. So sort of mastering that practice is described as calm abiding. And let's read a verse together from the Foundation of All Good Qualities, which if some of you have been here in previous classes, you remember we've read a few verses together. And that is on page 93 in the Gold Book, if you're in the Gampa. And I will let Lisa bring it up online as well. So the prayer starts on page 93. And we're going to read verse 9. which is on page 95. So it starts on the second English line on page 95. Okay, so we'll just read 4 lines, starting with the word once at the top of the page there. Once I've pacified distractions to wrong objects and correctly analyzed the meaning of reality, please bless me to generate quickly within my mind stream the unified path of calm abiding and special insight. Okay, so we saw calm abiding in there, and we also saw the next topic of special insight, which is what Buddhism in a nutshell calls it, but it's also the same thing that we've talked about with words like wisdom and emptiness and seeing reality accurately. So once we talk about the two, we'll talk about how we can bring them together to be much more powerful. So with calm abiding here, so as I mentioned, it's sort of like the result of mastering concentration, learning all we can about it, and having practiced it so well, it just comes naturally. Another description of it is like an absorptive level of meditative stabilization. That's sometimes a phrase that's used. And it's about keeping that focus on whatever object we choose, whether it be the breath, which is often a starter object, because that's something that we always have and is nice and simple to focus on as a starting practice. Another common thing to focus on would be an image of the Buddha, which is said to be uplifting and also creates positive imprints in your mind. It might help us find our way in a future life. If we take something like reincarnation as a hypothesis here, it might help us find our way if we have those imprints. So they say that that's sometimes how we find our spiritual path, is by familiarizing ourselves with things in one life, and then in the next life, we just have a feeling when we see those and we're naturally attracted. And one of the nice things about this state of calm abiding is that we can have suppleness or pliancy in both a physical sense and a mental sense. So in the physical sense, it really helps the body relax and also be stable at the same time. And in a mental sense, that means it's just very flexible. It's resilient, willing to change topics quickly if needed, and also willing to stay on a topic without becoming bored. And as a bonus, it also feels really blissful. So I spend a lot of time wondering, like, what's it like when people sit around closing their eyes and doing it for a long time and practicing? Like, what's going on in their mind afterwards? They say what's going on is a feeling of bliss. So I think that's pretty good news. So probably would have guessed maybe boredom would be the thing that would result from that. But the cool part is they say that once our mind relaxes and we get better at being both calm and focused, then a feeling of bliss is just kind of what naturally arises. So that's closer to our mind's natural state than the thoughts that we see in it now, like the excitement or boredom or anger or joy, all these different emotions. Those are just sort of momentary things that float through our mind from time to time, and they're not inherently part of our mind. The Tibetan word for calm abiding is shine, and the Sanskrit word is shamatha. So if you happen to have heard one of those two terms, sometimes those are used as well. And in the context of other things like special insight or wisdom of emptiness, the purpose of gaining this thing called calm abiding, or at least the most powerful purpose, and sort of, the number one, if we would be doing a family feud here and we had to think of the number one reason to do calm abiding, it would be to apply that state of mind to the concept of special insight, our second topic. In other words, wisdom, or the wisdom of emptiness. And we'll get to that next. But just as a reminder, emptiness is the word that sort of designates lack of inherent existence. and describing the way things really are, as opposed to the way we're sort of conditioned to think they are and assume they are. And so the purpose of calm abiding can be to get the state of mind that's like a meditative stabilization, and then apply that to this concept of emptiness. And they say if you apply calm abiding well to that concept, then that really helps you see that more directly and more naturally. And eventually you can get to a point where you can have a direct perception of that concept. And in the meantime, we can work on it intellectually. We can think about it conceptually. We can think about examples and definitions and purposes and things like that, and try to get our head around it. And then once we get that calm abiding, we can start to work on sort of having a direct experience of that phenomenon. And sometimes they talk about going up into the mountains and doing a meditation retreat, a silent retreat. Often that's for the purpose of developing calm abiding. And they say that if you have all the right circumstances and conditions in place, both external and internal, then if you take 6 months, then it's possible to develop and completely perfect this calm abiding in 6 months. So that sounds like a long time, but it's kind of cool that it's said to be doable in this lifetime. Of course, there's the disclaimer that we need all the right conditions, and they usually talk about 6 in particular. So here's your list if you're thinking about doing that at some point. The first one being finding a conducive place. And one of the aspects of that is that it's a place where there have been great meditators, or what is sometimes referred to as holy beings. That's kind of a strange phrase that actually we might find in other religions. In Buddhism, it refers to someone who has advanced realizations of these things like concentration and compassion and wisdom. And it's really beneficial to be in a place where a lot of those types of people have practiced. They say we receive blessings. And the word blessing, I guess we kind of could define that one too. There's so many words we can define. In Buddhism, a blessing is thought of as something that shifts your mind, changes your mind to see something from a different angle, or to think of something from a different point of view, to adjust your definition of something like that. So ideally, it would be a place where that kind of thing is much more readily available. We also need, of course, good food and water and air, nice clean air, and the lack of dangerous things, hazards like wild animals, poisonous plants. So if we have a place that's like that, like really conducive to being in a long-term meditation, then that's the place to go for developing calm abiding. So number 2 out of 6 is having few desires. And that's sort of referring to sense pleasures, basically. And it doesn't mean you can't have desire. It means basically that your mind isn't really occupied with being attached to certain objects, whether they be physical objects or mental objects. And so that basically gives you sort of a clean slate for trying to develop other things in your mind. And one of the obstacles to that is if there are lots of concepts already in your mind buzzing around, and you just sort of feel naturally excited and attracted to those. Number 3 would be being content with what you have. So I think sometimes that's the flip side of desire. Like if we sort of pacify our problematic aspects of desire, then we tend to feel content with what we already have. And so that's number 3 out of the 6. Number 4 being having abandoned the demands and responsibilities of society and just daily life in general, like not having family members who are depending on you, or the need to check in to do a certain job on a regular basis. So basically sort of the freedom to be as still and quiet and peaceful as you would like, and to remain in one place, and to sort of develop the natural calm that comes with the lack of distractions. Number 5 would be pure ethics, which we might define as having purified all the negativities of our body, speech, and mind. Things like, I think we can all sort of agree on the basics there, things like anger, impatience, irritation, all the states of mind that we just don't like. So pure ethics is sort of coupled with abandoning those feelings, because one of the philosophies in Buddhism is that those are the source of our suffering and our lack of ethics. Like our deviation from ethics is usually caused by one of those negative states of mind. And number 6 would be completely abandoning desire. And it's kind of weird when number 2 is already having few desires. But I think this is more about like really seriously abandoning them, especially the ones that are sense pleasures. Because one of the things that we do when we develop calm abiding is to try to just use our mental state rather than be observing things with our senses as we're accustomed to most of the time. And with those conditions, if we have those 6, and I think there are probably other prerequisites too, like I've heard it mentioned that it's helpful to have created strong karmic conditions. So I don't really know exactly what kind of karma that would be, but it'd probably be a habit of respecting mindfulness and meditation and a sort of a natural desire to practice those things. So there's probably different types of karma involved. Like that would be sort of like the experiential karma and the habit karma that we would be taking advantage of there. Okay. Anybody have any questions so far? Calm abiding? Okay. So how about the object of concentration that we might want to choose? I'd mentioned that common examples are the breath and maybe an image of the Buddha. And ultimately, it could be the concept of emptiness. That concept itself could be what we're focusing on. And as far as the time that you spend developing this, it's best to start with really short sessions. And as Geshe Gelik, the resident teacher here at the center, in case you haven't met him on one of the Sunday teachings, he often says that you really want to make sure that the sight of your meditation cushion doesn't make you want to vomit. So make sure you stop while things are good before you start to really get frustrated and impatient. So there's nothing wrong with quitting while you're ahead when it comes to something like that as a beginner. And anything starting with just a few seconds is said to be valuable. Just simply spending a few seconds, thinking about the idea of developing concentration and calming your mind is already valuable. And then you can extend it from there and try maybe for a minute. 3, 5, and 10 minutes seem to be sort of a natural progression that a lot of people do. And the idea being that once you really get comfortable with a certain amount of time, then you can go farther by extending that amount of time. I guess that's kind of a no-brainer. It's pretty much like anything else in life. If we want to improve something, we put more time into practice. So meditation is really no different. And we often use the phrase single-pointed to describe this, whereas technically it's kind of two-pointed. And it's interesting. I actually attended a seminar last week where someone was talking about actually, no, it wasn't a seminar. I think it was John Culkin. He was the guy who gave a talk at the Sunday session a couple weeks ago. He said one of the problematic things about single pointedness and also the idea of suffering, which is what he talked about, was thinking it's just about one thing, when actually it's about multiple things, especially while we're practicing having it be about one thing. But in particular, it's about focusing and also noticing when we've lost our focus. So those are kind of the two states of mind that we kind of have simultaneously when we're developing this. So we sort of have one part of our mind trying to become stable and focusing on the object we're looking at, and another part of our mind that is noticing when we've deviated from it. And one example I kind of like for that is like a telescope. So the lens on the telescope would sort of like be the concentration aspect of focusing, and aiming the telescope where you want to look is like the second part of noticing when you've strayed away from that object of focus. And mindfulness is another common word for that part. Often that second one, sort of noticing when you've strayed away and bringing your mind back. So yet another list we have is something called the 6 powers for developing calm abiding. And so that's just kind of basically, six types of things that we want to practice, and roughly in sort of the order. The first one being steady, as in like listening to teachings, receiving instructions from a qualified teacher. The second one being reflection or contemplation. That's basically thinking about things. So the things that you steady, basically a reflection or contemplation would be simply just kind of, reflecting on what you've learned, sort of practicing reviewing the concepts that you've just studied. Memory is the third one, often another synonym for mindfulness, or that second aspect of developing calm abiding. Just simply noticing when you've deviated from your focus and bringing your attention back. The fourth one being vigilance. That can be kind of similar to memory, but vigilance sort of extends a little bit to identifying what the distraction is when it arises and applying an antidote in that moment. So there are different kinds of antidotes from different kinds of obstacles we might encounter. And we'll get to those in pretty soon as we get through this list of 6 powers. So vigilance would basically be the practice of not just noticing the distraction and bringing your mind back, but also cultivating an awareness of what kind of distraction it was and what else you might be able to do to help bring your focus back and to maintain it. The fifth power would be perseverance. So we've encountered that before in terms of joyful effort, one of the 6 perfections. And if I'm remembering right, I think it's also the fourth one, the 4th perfection, and here it's the 5th power. And finally, the 6th power being familiarity. And we've talked about that one before as well, and in the sense of the translation of the word for meditation. I think it's Tibetan, it might be Sanskrit, but I think it's the Tibetan word that's gom. And that translates into familiarization, or to familiarize. And Gampa, which is often what they call this room, is like a place for doing that, a place for meditation or a place for familiarizing yourself with things. And this is one of the reasons we would want to do that, because this is one of the powers that could really help us achieve calm abiding. Okay, so the last topic here on this concept of calm abiding would be the 5 faults, yet another list. And the first one is about antidotes. So like I mentioned with vigilance, one of the 2 aspects of vigilance is applying an antidote, whereas the first aspect would be noticing what type of problem has happened. And the antidotes that are usually talked about, there are 4 of them that are commonly considered. The first one being faith, in this case being defined as seeing the benefits of it and believing that it's possible. Those are sort of aspects of what they call faith in this context. So, and if you think about that's really kind of true, that if we look at the reasons that we stick with things and go back to them and develop habits and things like that, especially if they're difficult, is if we see the benefits. So if we really don't see the benefits of something, it's much more difficult. We really have to sort of try to apply something like blind faith, which is not recommended. Buddhism never asks for blind faith. So even though faith in general is considered virtuous, blind faith is considered an obstacle and a negative state of mind. Another antidote is aspiration. So in other words, thinking about the wish to attain something. So faith would be sort of knowledge of the benefits and the belief in it being possible, whereas aspiration would be deciding that you want to do it. And so that kind of state of mind can be a nice antidote, especially to laziness. And actually, that's true with faith too. I think I forgot to mention that. But so the first of these five, what they call faults of things that can go wrong trying to develop meditation, is laziness. And the antidotes are these things, faith and aspiration being the first two. Perseverance, we've seen that one before. That's often talked about as well. And mental pliancy, which I think I maybe mentioned briefly at the very beginning of the class, but that's sort of the idea of having a very flexible state of mind so that you're not really stubbornly holding on to something and you don't have something that's kind of drawing you away from your object of focus again and again. The second fault in trying to develop meditation is forgetting the object. And the antidote to that is just simply the mindfulness aspect. So sometimes these lists seem fairly straightforward, but nevertheless, they're structured in a way so that when you study them seriously, they're sort of points to come back to over and over again. A third fault would be excitement or dullness, depending on which end of the spectrum it's on. So excitement is generally defined as your mind sort of chasing after something you're attracted to, especially if it's something that you see as pleasurable, pleasurable to the senses in particular. Usually in the concept of being an obstacle to meditation, that's the context in which it's talked about. So that's one end of the spectrum. The other one being dullness, or basically just sort of like a brain fog, sort of getting tired, really hard to focus. I'm sure some of us know that state of mind. And they can both be obstacles. And in my experience, at least, I find it difficult to avoid both extremes. I sometimes find myself going from excitement straight into dullness. Like once I abandon the object of whatever I'm excited about, then I tend to become dull if I don't put it on something productive instead. So, and the antidote to those things is the vigilance that we talked about. So those are the two main sort of varieties of a lot of the distractions that we have in meditation. As some of them are sort of oriented with excitement, others are oriented with dullness. So this thing called vigilance is a good strategy for that. And the last two are kind of self-explanatory, I guess. They're described as the non-application of one of these antidotes and the over-application of one of these antidotes. So that's how we get to 5. So that can apply to any of these first 3 things. So experiencing laziness, forgetting the object, or excitement or dullness, and also not applying the remedy to those things. Or maybe applying too much of the remedy. So I don't know exactly what is the stated reason to not do that, but I guess it's just kind of the simple concept of don't overdo it. Not overdoing meditation would be one example of that, making sure that you maintain a pleasant state of mind towards your meditation cushion, not want to vomit. Okay, so we have reached our list of things about calm abiding. If anybody has any more questions about that. Okay. Oh, Lisa.
What do most people start off with as their object? Is their Something easy to start off with.
The breath is the one that I definitely hear come up the most. Um, and also an image of the Buddha. That's probably seems like the most, it's kind of the second most common one. And then another one that's sort of common, but also really hard is the one about emptiness. So, we don't want to start out trying to develop calm abiding about that because it's a intricate topic that can have lots of misunderstandings. It's much better to develop a really good conceptual understanding first before you try to apply it to that. Um, I'm curious, has anybody else practiced a different kind of thing? Like if you practice a simple meditation of concentration, like is there something other than the breath or an image of the Buddha that you would focus on? CJ, did you have an idea?
Anyone online?
Oh, you're just getting ready with the mic.
Anyone
Perfect.
online would like to respond? Just unmute.
So that's a great question, Lisa. And off the top of my head, those are the only three that come to mind. Oh, yes. If you wouldn't mind waiting for the mic, then the people online can hear too. Thank you.
So I go to DBT therapy, and one of the things we do is called willing hands. So basically, you just focus on having your palms up. And that's something that I tend to do when I meditate, just like focus on the sensation of my hands on my lap. But like really focus on it.
Oh, interesting. And what's DBT? I'm not familiar with that.
It's dialectical behavioral therapy. It's actually a lot of it's based on Buddhism. It was developed by Marsha Linehan.
I have heard that name, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Thank you. I'm happy to know another one. So if I get tired of those three, then I'll go for that one. Sounds like I should read about it first, though, since it's attached to a philosophy, right? So, okay. All right.
I have a question about what you touched on. So
Sure.
to achieve calm abiding, you use meditation. And part of meditation is the awareness that you are being distracted. And I always have a problem with those two aspects of meditation because the awareness then takes me away from the focus. How do you square that? And what would you say about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first thing that comes to mind is what I said about bouncing between dullness and excitement, that's sort of something that I see tend to happen. I guess maybe just in general, the advice that I hear with that is to try to practice not looking too closely at what you noticed, like at that distraction, like kind of thinking about it like a cloud floating through the sky. That's a visual that I sometimes hear with that. And there are definitely types of meditation, and actually one of the somethings, I forget which list it was, but one of the thing vigilance, I think it was. So vigilance is about noticing what the distraction was. So that is a type of awareness you might practice with that, but it's not required. You don't need to be practicing all these things at once, especially at the start, I think. The advice I usually hear at the beginning of a practice, like for someone who hasn't meditated a lot, is simply to just try to be really neutral with whatever you become aware of, whichever distraction. And then that is usually helpful in getting us back to the object of focus, like sort of not getting the story started, I guess. So sometimes once we let a narrative begin, it's hard to stop that, get some momentum. So, did that answer your question? I'm sorry, I don't have good advice.
There's the they sometimes talk about the awareness fish.
Oh yeah, that's
I don't know.
right. I'd forgotten about that. Can you remind me sort of what the context is, if you remember?
I think the idea is that your mind is supposed to be like clear water, right? Very still, clear water. And then your mindfulness fish is just this tiny little part of your mind that can move through the water without disturbing it, but can observe what's going on in your mind. So it's kind of like a third party that's kind of just observing your mind to make sure that you're staying focused.
Okay.
I don't
That-
know if I described it well. Maybe somebody
That
else
actually
did.
sounds very
Somebody
familiar
might
after you
have-
explain it.
And
Yep.
might have more to add, but
Yeah, but thank you for reminding me. I had forgotten, especially the aspect about the not disturbing the water. I think that's really nice. And I like the term mindfulness fish. We should put that in a list. I think that should get official entry into a list here. So Kurt, I think that's a great answer for yours. So be the mindfulness fish. Okay. Any other questions or thoughts, comments? Okay, guess we'll move on to special insight then. And so as before, we're going to plan on taking a break roughly at 8 o'clock, maybe a few minutes before. Might be about the right amount of time to cover special insight and then do a review afterwards, but we'll see. Okay, so let's define emptiness first. So what's this thing that we want to develop an awareness of or an understanding of? There are lots of phrases or metaphors or synonyms for this. And I made a list so I could remember them. Probably the most common one that I hear is lack of inherent existence. Not existing from its own side is another one. Being merely labeled. Intrinsically real. And having a concrete independent existence. So, and I'm afraid I didn't make it clear here, but some of these qualities are actually, I think the last two are actually things that emptiness is not. So my notes are not correct there. So let's review them to make sure I got it right here. So we have our lack of inherent existence. Yep, that's emptiness. Not existing from its own side. That's another phrase that's used. Merely labeled. That's one as well. So I should say not intrinsically real as the fourth one, and not having a concrete independent existence as the fifth one I have in my list here. Anybody else want to volunteer a phrase or a term that I've left out? Those of you who have heard some teachings on this concept or read about it. I'm trying to think as well. I guess Venerable Urbina often talks about seeing things from a different point of view. I think that might be a helpful phrase for kind of thinking about what it is to think about emptiness. Like instead of trying to figure out what the word means, you can just think of the concept we already understand about looking at something from a different point of view. And I believe when Venerable Urbina mentions that, she says that it's something that the Dalai Lama says too. Okay, so I have a list here of some opposites that come up as terms as well. So things being solid, having its own nature, independent of things like its parts, causes, conditions, and who's observing it, like something being apart from all those things, existing inherently from its own side, which is sort of the flip side of one of the first set, I think. So the bad news is that second list is how we tend to see things, according to Buddhist psychology, is that that's sort of our habit that we've developed, and a very strong one, so much so that we don't even know that we have it, really. It's something that we tend to think about as, we don't know what we don't know, basically. It's one of those things. And so that's one of the ways in which we can sort of get a handle on things, is kind of practicing this point of view called emptiness, so that we give ourselves a chance to remember that concept and recognize it when we see it. And if we want to extend that thought further to sort of what our main problem tends to be on our path to enlightenment, that would be our interactions with reality tending to be based on that second set of criteria, seeing things as solid, having their own nature and things like that. And the fact that we tend to have that as our mindset when we interact with anything in reality, whether it be a concept or a person or an inanimate object, when we're looking at that, when we're looking at it in that point of view, some type of ignorance tends to be dug deeper in our mind, and that tends to lead to negative states of mind. And in fact, ignorance is described as kind of the granddaddy of them all, kind of the root negative state of mind from which all the others can spring. And so that's kind of the main reason to look at this carefully, that if you're tired of suffering and the habits that lead to it, then this is what they often point to as the most problematic one. It's one of the hardest, but we can definitely make progress by getting a head start. And the good news as well is that getting a hold on this concept can help us with lots of the other practices as well. That if we have a better understanding of it, then we can meditate better too. For example, we might be less distracted to things if we've thought carefully about how they don't exist from their own side. Like if we think of something we're attracted to, like a favorite food or a favorite person, favorite show, then if we spend some time thinking about how it exists and how it doesn't and how we might be exaggerating it, then that might help it come up less often as an obstacle in our meditation. So another way of describing this problem is that we tend to project qualities onto things that they don't actually possess. And projection is a nice term, I think, that comes up a lot in therapy. And a lot of us checked in on the very first class. I remember that mentioning therapy is one of our motivations for checking out Buddhism and maybe coming to this class in particular. Or maybe in your case, checking out DPT. DPT sounds like that might have been involved there as well. So emptiness would be about chilling with our projections and learning to recognize when we're doing it and trying to see things without those projections on top of them. So we might ask, well, how things do actually exist then? If we're spending time here talking about how they don't exist, how do they? That's a very complicated topic that we won't need to get into here in Buddhism in a nutshell, being a beginner's class. So I think I'm off the hook there trying to explain that. But in general, they talk about something called the five aggregates. You may have heard that term. And that's generally considered to be sort of the collection of ingredients that we need to make a phenomenon, something that actually does exist. So one way to kind of summarize these pieces of the five aggregates is that they're like parts, causes, conditions, and a label for the bunch. So that tends to be sort of the four main ingredients to an object that we perceive. Another phrase describing things that do exist instead of the way things don't exist is dependent arising. So we can look at the point of view that everything we experience and every phenomenon we can point to or think of in our minds depends on other things too. And all those things kind of arise together and make a phenomenon or something that exists. And I'll read off the list in a slightly more formal way of talking about those things. So the five aggregates are form, feeling, perception, or sometimes described as discrimination, mental formations, which has some metaphoric phrases that are also kind of complex, volitional factors and compositional factors. Those, in addition to mental formations, are synonyms that I hear for this. I like to think of it as sort of a grab bag of miscellaneous. once I get to the other four aggregates, I think of the fifth one as kind of the miscellaneous one. So, so consciousness being the fifth one. And I think other aspects of that fourth broader category that I didn't mention are also things like karma and motivation. Those are other topics that we've talked about in this class. So when all those things come together, that's sort of our definition of something that exists. And if we don't have all of those conditions together, then that thing as we're seeing it or defining it doesn't exist like that. So one way that we can practice this is doing something called a 4-point analysis. And I think I noticed when I reviewed this and preparing for this class that this thing called that they call the 4-point analysis is similar to a lot of the instructions we do get if we're trying to meditate on emptiness or think about emptiness and do an analytical meditation. But the first step is to pick an object that you want to assess. And I think that's a very important first step because one of the most common misunderstandings of this concept of emptiness is that it's sort of a thing in and of itself. That you can sort of point to this thing called emptiness or describe this thing called emptiness, because just like the things it's trying to describe, emptiness itself doesn't exist as a phenomenon inherently. And making the mistake of believing that it does is what we might call nihilism or nihilism. I never know how that word is pronounced, and sometimes I hear the phrase great mistake to summarize that particular mistake. And so it's important in this 4-point analysis to start out with saying what we want to talk about the emptiness of. So it has to be the emptiness of something in particular. So the emptiness of this microphone or this laptop or this clock. So when we talk about emptiness, it's not productive to just say the word emptiness itself and somehow try to grab that concept. It's much more stable to make sure that you identify what you're talking about the emptiness of. And to avoid confusion, we should talk about one thing at a time, like the emptiness of these things that I pointed to. The most important one, they say, is the way we see ourselves. So our own sort of personal definition of this thing called self, or me, or I, or whatever, has plenty of synonyms there. And once we sort of take that as the object to sort of dismantle our misperceptions about, then that's what we might call in this first point of the 4-point analysis as our object to be negated. That's just kind of a phrase for it. I thought I'd read a phrase in a very common prayer that's recited too, that I think is interesting with regarding this concept. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. Have any of you heard of the Heart Sutra? So, yeah, I see some nodding, some shaking of heads. So the Heart Sutra is one of the main prayers that addresses this topic of emptiness and wisdom and developing something like special insight. And two of the more famous verses, I think, in this prayer, which is about 6 or 7 pages long or so. It's in the Gold Book. If you're interested, it starts on page, is it 73? Nope, that's not it. Oh, it looks like it's page 76. Actually, the full title of this text is The Heart of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. Often its shorthand name is the Heart Sutra. So anyway, so these two verses are: form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. So I'm not sure if I would say it's well known, because before I heard of the Heart Sutra, I certainly hadn't heard that. But it does tend to be sort of a memorable part in this sutra. Just reviewing it one more time, form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form, and form is also not other than emptiness. So I heard an interesting teaching on the fact that mainly what these two verses are referring to is this concept of making sure we get this first of the 4 points of analysis going correctly by clarifying what we're looking at the emptiness of. Because wherever there's emptiness, there's a form that you need to attach it to for it to be a meaningful concept. And wherever there's something you can point to as a phenomenon, there's emptiness, because emptiness is a property of that thing. Whatever you point it to, no matter what it is, emptiness is a property of all things that exist. And so these two verses are just kind of a complicated way of saying all that, that wherever there's form, there's emptiness too, and vice versa. Anyway, I thought it was really cool when I heard the teaching on that. Okay, so 4-point analysis. So once we've chosen our object, best maybe not to choose self as the very first one if you're doing this kind of meditation for the first time or this line of thinking for the first time, because that one can be kind of delicate. So sometimes it's difficult to look very carefully. Well, I guess that's kind of the nature of therapy and why it takes effort, because looking very closely at ourselves can be hard. It's hard to see our own minds and the mistakes in our own minds. And one of my favorite alternate definitions of Buddhist practice is looking at your mind. So just simply working with your mind, looking at it, seeing what's in there, recognizing what things you like, what things you don't like, those kinds of things. And if you are taking the self to be the object, so again, I'm not recommending that as a starting point, but it is definitely talked about a lot as sort of the most important one to work towards, to apply to this analysis. They say that the best way to sort of get a handle on exactly what this definition of self is, you can try to think of times when you've been really embarrassed, really offended, angry, whatever. You think of any negative emotion that tends to be really intense. If you can somehow sort of zoom in on exactly what your concept of self was in that moment, they say that that can sort of help us get a handle on what our misperceptions are about it. Like maybe, for example, if we're offended about something, then you might say things to yourself in your mind like, well, I don't believe in that. So there's the word I. And how could you do that to me? So there's a me in there. So you can zoom in on that. So if we're having trouble getting a read on sort of, well, I know I see myself in all these weird ways, but how do I really focus on it? That's the recommended kind of technique for that. Think about those moments. Okay, so step 2 in this 4-point analysis would be asking, is this thing that I'm looking at the emptiness of part of my body and mind, or is it separate from them? And thinking about that in a way that it's sort of a dichotomy, like taking as a hypothesis, well, it's one or the other. It's either a part of my body and mind or it's not. And some questions that you can ask when you explore this part of the analysis would be, is it my brain? Can I define my brain as the self or me? Is it my mental consciousness? One kind of funny description I've heard of it before is the idea that there's sort of like a mini me inside of our head who's looking through our eyes, talking through our mouth, smelling through our nose, listening through our ears, somehow located somewhere here in our head that's kind of taking everything in and making our decisions for us and so on. So we can look at that. Is that a reasonable thing to think of as self? So this point number 2 is simply to ask that question. Like whatever it is I'm thinking of, however it is I'm defining it, whether it's the mini me or the brain or whatever, is that part of my body and mind, or is it separate from it? And the idea of this analysis is that If you look more closely at those two parts of the dichotomy, looking at something being a part of your body and mind and something being separate, you start to realize that it's hard to answer either of those questions as yes. And sort of looking at why that is a way to sort of think about emptiness. Like, why wouldn't this thing about self really be a part of my body and mind, but also not really separate either? So that sort of helps us get less attached to maybe our very specific definition of self. And the result of this 4-point analysis would be to reach a conclusion like, aha, that thing that I was looking at the emptiness of doesn't really exist like I thought it did. So that's kind of the main technique there. If you sort of go through this thought process and think conceptually about emptiness, or you could also do this as an analytical meditation. So, all right, so I think my favorite example is rushing out the house and realizing you forgot your keys. So, all right, so is that the best one? Or what do you think, CJ? Maybe the bank account example, do you think? Yeah, we have a question. So. Oh, thank you. That is a great question. I think I covered them all, but you're right. I did forget to say actually what the third and fourth ones are. So thank you for that, for catching that. So just a quick review of the first two, you identify the object to be negated. You ask the question, is it a part of my body and mind or not? Step 3 is to refute the first option that it's a part of my body and mind. So think of reasons like, why wouldn't it be a part of my body and mind? Like, can I think of any contradictions if I try to assume it's part of my body and mind? So step 3 is kind of focusing on that side of the dichotomy. And step 4 being focusing on the other side. So if you've kind of tentatively decided, if you've chosen that in your dichotomy, well, I think it's separate. Then the challenge in this step 4 is to look closely at that. Is it really separate? If I assume it is, can I come to a contradiction in my mind and somehow convince myself that it's actually not the case? So thank you for asking about that. So anyway, one of the examples that comes up sometimes in teachings is the feeling that you're rushing out of the house, you realize you forgot your keys. So you rush back inside, go to your key drawer, and open the drawer to get your keys. And you look in the drawer and you don't see the keys there. So you might ask yourself the question like, well, what did I see when I looked in the drawer? So that might be sort of taking the object of negation being the contents of this drawer. So let's look at the emptiness of the contents of this drawer. So if we sort of apply this analysis, actually this really doesn't use the examples that I used because those are really for if the object is the self. So I guess we don't need to go through that analysis formally. But anyway, do any of you have any ideas about how we could answer that question? Like if you're trying to use this technique and define like, well, take as a phenomenon being contents of a drawer. So that is a phenomenon that sort of has, we can point to it, we can describe it and sort of agree conventionally on what we mean when we say that. So it's a legitimate object that we can look at the emptiness of. So do you have a thought, Lisa?
I think what you experience is the emptiness of keys.
Ah,
Is that,
yes.
Is that right?
That is the answer, actually.
Okay.
So very good. So the best way to do that as example is to have someone say something else and then we can refute it. But you saved us some time, so thank you. So yes, sort of the take-home lesson from that example is that if we look in the drawer, it's not that we see the comb there or our wallet there or whatever actually is in the drawer, or maybe a lot of dust if we haven't cleaned it. So we can go through all the things that we see in the drawer. And when we try to see the self, this is kind of what we do is, we go through sort of all the ways in which we define ourselves and everything. And that's sort of analogous to going really carefully through the contents of this drawer to try to understand why the keys aren't there. But the way to really make more progress is to recognize the thing that we need to negate, which is the belief that the keys were there. So that's really sort of at the heart of the matter. So it's sort of getting in touch with the fact that as I was running back into the house, I really believed the keys were in that drawer. I had a vivid image in my mind of what those keys looked like, opening the door and I could hear them clinking around. Maybe I thought about what else is in there. And I was shocked when I didn't see it. So why would I be surprised? Because that belief that the keys are in there was just thwarted. I had just seen that it isn't actually true. And they say that's sort of what we're working towards with this concept of self. Like one day, once we get there finally, we'll say, oh my goodness, that thing that I thought existed here that I've been pointing to all my life, calling me and I and everything, it doesn't exist that way. And we still need to be careful to not make the conclusion, oh, so it doesn't exist. Nope, that's not it. Remember, point one is we look at the emptiness of something, not just this vague thing called emptiness. So it's not about things not existing. It's about things not existing as we really believe they did. So, okay. Any other thoughts about special insight? So there we go. So we've covered that topic. We'll talk a little bit about the other two, this thing called Tantra and our daily practice after we take a short break. So also during the break, feel free to think of some more questions or comments or thoughts, anything about these topics we've covered or other related topics. Please jump in after the break and about 5 minutes. So let's see. So it looks like it's about 8:04, so about 8:09. Let's meet back here. Okay, see you then. So apologies to the people online. We were having a discussion here, but I would like to bring you into the discussion. So if you wouldn't mind giving a mic to Chris here. I would love for you to ask the question again, Chris, if you wouldn't mind. So.
Okay. I've always had a problem with that keys not being there description, even when Venerable Rabina gives it.
Mhm.
It never really clicked. But I think it's not about the object, the key. No, that doesn't make any sense either, because no, wait. No, yes, it does, because there is a physical object there, no matter if you're realizing emptiness of it or not, or realizing its emptiness or not. There are keys there. But I think what the purpose of that whole description is you think that the keys are there, and then you open the drawer and there's no keys there. But that opening the drawer, that's you observing it and realizing that the keys are just parts, none of which are the keys themselves. Causes and conditions, all the stuff that had to come together, the metal, the plastic, la, 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 and your mind that sees it. Now I'm losing my train of thought again.
Mhm.
It just,
I have an idea. Maybe if we extend this a little bit to go back out to the car, and the person in the car is like, well, what happened? You can say, well, the keys aren't in the drawer. And you might ask, well, what did you see in the drawer? And that's a reasonable question to ask, right? Like, what else was in the drawer? What did you see in the drawer? And then you would probably answer that by saying, well, I saw the brush and I saw the remote control or things like that. But you probably wouldn't say, oh, I saw the absence of keys. Like, you wouldn't say that. But if you look closely at what you're feeling, then I guarantee you, when you open that drawer, before you have the thought, oh, there's a brush, oh, there's a remote control or whatever, you have the thought, oh, no keys. So it's like we kind of leave that part out, but it's the most important part. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
That's different than the absence. Is that, help me out here. Is that the difference of the absence of something is still a phenomena and we still experience it? Just like we experience, like Chris was talking about, here's a light bulb. We look at it and see we use our perception, our senses to experience a light bulb there. But we know once we've had the realization of absence of keys, absence of light, that there is no light bulb. So the two are separate. I think it's two separate things. Does that help? It's the absence and it's
that's the important part. Absence of there's no.
oh, would you mind
Yeah.
handing a mic, please? Yeah. Great. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, okay, let's suppose the keys are there and you open the drawer and there's the keys. Well, you're so used to misconceiving that there are keys in there, but there really aren't. That's the realization of emptiness, that when you understand that it's just parts, just causing conditions, and just your mind that labels that thing as keys.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's great. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that is a missing piece. Yep. Thank you, Chris.
But I never got it again. Feeling, oh, that's what.
Yeah. So I guess that habit that you're describing might lead us to call that the key drawer. And maybe the whole rest of our life, oh, that's just the key drawer. It's possible that when, 20 years later, when we go back to that drawer, the keys just aren't there. And here we spent 20 years thinking about it as the key drawer. It had nothing to do with keys. So those are the kinds of mistakes that we're making all the time with this concept called self, I guess, is what the,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I had a thought about this as well because this has been described to me in the past with a different description, and I might be totally derailing us, but it was described as like a rose is not a rose because a rose, you can think of it as being like a stem and some petals, but then it's like, well, what are the stem and the petals? And so what was described to me is that a rose is actually the ground and the sun and the rain and maybe the person who tends to the flower. And so the phrase that was described to me is like, I know that a rose is a rose because it is not a rose. Um, that's how it was described to me. And then to extend that thought to like the self of like, I am like the environment that I live in. I am the things around me. And so that's why I think it also contradicts with the nihilist view, where it's like, it's not that I don't exist, it's that I am more distributed, maybe. Like that's what was described to me.
that's great. Thank you for that. Oh, if you wouldn't mind waiting for the mic.
Sorry.
Awesome. Thanks.
It's not that you're nothing, it's that you're everything, right? You're defined, you don't have boundaries that define you by itself. It's how you relate to other things that defines you. So it's not some inside to out, it's outside to in.
Yeah. Yeah, sum of parts. I think that's what you said, right? Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, you both hit great angles that I just didn't touch yet. So perfect. So
I don't know if it would be kind of accurate to say that it's kind of like seeing and being flexible with knowing that how you perceive things is not always the reality of things. And sometimes it's like basically to summarize what you guys were saying, it's like, is it the whole of the parts or the parts of the whole? Like, you get what I mean? And sometimes it really, when you break things down, it's kind of like we are little bits and pieces, and then put together, we are who we are, right? So that's how I understand it. I don't know if that's accurate, but yeah.
I think those are all great ways of describing it for sure. So yeah, I'll hand you the mic next time I try to teach emptiness.
So I just wanted
TJ.
to add here that John, you may know more about this than me, but I think there are multiple sort of formal analyses that for emptiness. So I think like there's an analysis based on the parts, which is what we were talking about, kind of with the light bulb. But then there's also an analysis of emptiness being, or phenomena being existing in relation to causes and conditions. So again, those things that are going into making that thing. So there, and I think there's maybe one or two more, but they're kind of when you look into like the formal analyses of emptiness, there are several different kind of approaches that that are traditionally taken to kind of negate our common understanding of existence.
Folks
Yeah,
online, sorry for the apologies for the sound. We've really got some rain coming down here and some rumbling, so it might be a little harder to hear.
Yeah, that's a great point, CJ. And I think what all three of you described is a type of 4-point analysis, just not for the self necessarily, but dependent arising. Oh, Kurt, let's take your question and then I'll get back to that.
This is gonna sound really trivial, but I always hear from its own side, and side bothers me. I don't know what that means. Could you use a different word?
Oh, definitely. I think there are probably
What would
lots of
you
different
use?
words we could use. So yeah.
Right, would you say it is not independent? I mean, what other word would you use?
Yeah, not inherently existent. Um, And you can say what it is instead of what it isn't, like it's dependent on other things.
Right.
Yeah, it's composed of lots of parts and causes. Yeah. So yeah, I think there probably are lots of ways saying it without side, but I would agree. I hear the word side in most definitions. So
All right, thank you.
yeah. So another thing I remember Venerable Urbina saying is that another thing kind of different from the 4-point analysis is thinking about dependent arising, because that's sort of anti-emptiness. Or the flip side, not anti in the sense of it doesn't exist, but like it's sort of like, well, if it's not that, then what is it? And then dependent arising is sort of the answer. And I think there's a phrase, the king of logics to proving emptiness is dependent arising. So it even has a phrase for being a really good technique. And you're exactly right. I think all of you have alluded to this, like sort of the idea, and that is if you're trying to identify the light or yourself or whatever, you start defining it. Like, well, does it end here? Like, no, actually, there's my mom living somewhere who, you know, she's sort of part of me because without her, I wouldn't exist. So you could certainly include her in the definition, and the car that I drove here in, you know, lots of things like that. And dependent arising is sort of the phrase to describe the fact that all of these things contributed. And if you go far enough, there's nothing that you can exclude. It's like anything you can point to and see and think of, all those things are part of your existence and part of this thing called me. So I think that's sort of what dependent arising is getting at there. And any other comments? Okay. Well, thank you. I got some wonderful ideas about emptiness, and think we all did a nice group think there. Okay. So we have a couple short topics here, and then we've already done some fun review, I think, because other topics have come up certainly, but we can do some more of that. We have time after these. So Tantra, let's look at that. Another word for it is Vajrayana. That's sort of the more technical word for it. Or a Vajra vehicle. That's another phrase that's sometimes used. And I think maybe the best way to summarize it in a nutshell, since that's what this course is the quick path to enlightenment. So if you have the prerequisites, then Tantra is said to be the best way, the fastest way, the most powerful way to get there. And if we ask, well, what are the prerequisites? Those are three things we've already talked about: renunciation, bodhicitta, and emptiness. So those are called the three principal aspects of the path. And those actually occur a lot in the prayer that we've been reading together, the foundation of all good qualities. So it's said that if you have a really good understanding of all three, renunciation, so if you've come to the point where you're just really done with the suffering and you're determined to get out, you're determined to get free of it, that's basically renunciation. Bodhicitta would be developing the feeling like, oh man, I must finish the job. I must get to enlightenment because that's when I can really help other people. Until then, I try, I mean well, but I kind of make a mess of things. But if I'm really enlightened and I have all those qualities like infinite compassion, infinite awareness, all those things, then what better way to help? So bodhicitta is sort of defined as those two parts of wanting to get to enlightenment and the reason why, which would be because it's the perfect condition from which I can help others. So, and then number three being emptiness, which we just covered. So given an understanding of all three of those, and of course, probably many other prerequisites too, but that's how it's usually summarized in terms of like, what are the precursors or prerequisites. And it also, to practice it, you would get something called an initiation. And there's a similar concept called an empowerment, and I always forget which is which. But basically, the tradition and the practice of Tantra is that you wouldn't try to go about it on your own because that would just be too dangerous because of how powerful it is. And so I guess you could say one of the other prerequisites is finding a qualified teacher to guide you, even though it's not explicitly mentioned here. That's definitely one of the things that needs to happen as well. And sometimes it's called the secret teachings or secret mantra. I think there's several phrases involving the word secret, not because people who do it are cool or whatever. It's simply alluding to that fact that it can be dangerous. So they want to keep it on the down low so that they don't go around talking about it and spreading misconceptions and things like that because of the ways in which it can be dangerous. So, and once we talk more about it, maybe you'll start to see some of those ways in which it could be dangerous. Like if you start out with the wrong motivation or have a really important misunderstanding about one of those three topics we listed. And conceptually, in terms of those two topics we just covered, calm abiding and special insight, another way of describing Tantra is that it's the combination of those two things. And in particular, the way they're combined is in achieving a state of mind that's calm abiding and then focusing that on the concept of special insight. And if it's pure, genuine calm abiding and you've had a good intellectual understanding of special insight, that might very well be the ingredients that you need to see emptiness directly. And the direct perception of this thing called emptiness is what they say is that's the threshold where you're done with suffering. So if you can get to the point where you have a non-conceptual understanding of emptiness, in other words, just sort of like just a gut feeling, not even a concept, it's just as if you're observing it as a phenomenon directly somehow, which of course we can't do with our senses. We would have to do that with our mind. But the state of mind in which we can do that is this thing called calm abiding. And there's also lots of imagery involving these two things. The calm abiding is represented by a male and the special insight by a female, and a lot of these paintings in the room here. If you look around the room, some of them have both a male and female in it, and that's what they're representing there. The male being calm abiding, the female being the special insight or wisdom. And I think there are a lot of pop culture definitions of Tantra which are quite different. Like my memory of the pop culture is that it had something to do with sex. And it does in the sense that if you do look at these images, there are images of male and female in sexual embrace. But that's really as far as the similarity goes is when it comes to Buddhism. Whereas in Buddhism, even though it's part of the imagery, the whole point is to finish the path to enlightenment and do it as quickly as possible. So it's not about the pleasures. It's not about the sexual gratification aspect. It's just simply imagery that can be used. Another phrase that's sometimes used is bliss and void. I don't know if any of you have happened to have heard that, but that's another way of saying these two same things, recognizing the fact that calm abiding is like pure bliss, because that's the side effect of calm abiding. They say that it is possible to develop it with lots of different kinds of motivations, and it's a lot easier to develop than to develop special insight or wisdom of emptiness. But that it only becomes really powerful when you have a motivation of enlightenment and can apply it to this concept of special insight. But that no matter what, like even if you're developing calm abiding outside of the context of Buddhism, and in fact, there are a lot of ancient traditions that far predated Buddhism that have that concept and have methods to achieve it, like Hinduism, I think, is just one example that they have. The Indians are renowned for having really powerful techniques to accomplish calm abiding. And they do it outside the context of Buddhism. So it's not unique to Buddhism at all. So bliss being the calm abiding and void being another, unfortunately, weird way, I guess, of saying emptiness. So, okay. So as far as the techniques to try to practice Tantra, the main concept here is that we're transforming negative qualities into positive ones. And in particular, with us being in this thing called the desire realm, I don't know if I've used the term like that before, but there are a lot of different ways we can exist as sentient beings. And in particular, we're humans who exist in a desire realm, which means that sort of the main thing going on is desire. That's like, like the thing that tends to drive us the most, the thing we get the most mistakes about, and so on. So being in a desire realm, Tantra is a way of looking at that like, wow, we have a lot of desire energy here, so much energy. When we really get obsessed with something, we can go to town. And, I think that concept is also involved when people talk about anger being a good thing sometimes, or anger being productive sometimes. So Tantra would be a great way of harnessing that. Like if you could look at anger that leads to social change, for example. If you look closer at the anger, you can separate the negative aspects from the positive aspects. The negative aspects being, the underlying hatred or misunderstandings or whatnot, and the positive aspects being things that you can use as fuel for this practice called Tantra. And one of the ways in which we do that is because we do spend a lot of time in our culture thinking about sex. So that sex is one of the ways we can visualize desire or remember desire to generate some energy that we can use as fuel for Tantra as well. So that's another way in which that could be involved. But it can really be done with any type of positive energy coming from any type of negative energy. And I always think of Star Trek when I think of this, sort of like, are we divert the anger into the compassion here? Like the shields and the weapons, and it's different qualities, taking the negative ones and putting that energy into the positive ones. And it's also about sort of envisioning yourself as the end result. And we're definitely familiar with that concept in the sense of, like, for example, like really hardcore training for Olympics or any other sport. That one of the techniques that's really scientifically established in our culture is the power of the visualization of that. Like if someone really rehearses the routine in their head and has a really vivid sense of it and puts lots of energy into that effort, then they can accomplish incredible results. And the same is true of Tantra, that we're imagining ourselves as fully enlightened, and whatever all the qualities are that we would have when we are fully enlightened. And again, with these paintings around the room, a lot of these images are depictions of different qualities of full enlightenment. So they're often used as images for Tantra also. So that a practice of Tantra would often involve sort of having one of these deities being one to focus on. And people usually choose a quality that is really powerful for them. And it could be powerful in a good way or a negative way. Like if somebody really has a problem with anger, you could practice Tantra with anger by transforming the anger itself into a purified form. I'm not sure exactly what they call purified anger, but sometimes the word wrath is used for that, but that can be confusing because that means a different thing in conventional sense. Or it can, like there's a deity called Yamantaka that's sort of a classic for purifying anger and transforming that into positive qualities. And Vajrayogini is another deity that transforms desire into qualities of enlightenment. And I don't think we have a picture of the Vajrayogini in here, but she's red in color. A term for this idea is divine pride. So that's sometimes a phrase that's used for this idea of imagining yourself as the end result. So it's about sort of, and divine pride is great, I think, because it can be applied directly to something we have plenty of in our culture, which is low self-esteem. And so one of the great ways we can take advantage of that, I mean, that is certainly a negative state of mind because, I mean, who likes low self-esteem? I don't. And certainly has a lot of energy that can lead to depression, manic depressive, all sorts of problems if we have low self-esteem. So we can harness the energy from that too. And what better way than sort of cultivating a visualization that's sort of the opposite? Like whatever we think ourselves that's negative and painful, we can just sort of go straight to that other end of the spectrum and think about ways in which we can be amazing, having all these positive qualities, and just get really good at visualizing that actually happening and is sort of like bringing that result into the present. That's another way it's described as well. So if we have enough of an energy source and have enough discipline and understanding of the topics and all that stuff, then they say Tantra is the fastest way to go. And in the Tibetan tradition, it's often described as being motivated by just really intense compassion and love for other sentient beings. That's like the most powerful thing that can sort of like get you through the process of Tantra. That if that's what's fueling it, as you know, the genuine bodhicitta, the perfect compassion and perfect love, then you can visualize yourself as being perfectly loving and perfectly compassionate. And then that motivation is so strong that just makes Tantra work. That can bring the result into the present. So what else here? Yeah, a lot of concepts here, but basic concept is that transformation from negative to positive and kind of taking advantage of the fact that we have plenty of negative around. There's nothing wrong with going to the mountains and having solitude and developing concentration and all those things. That's fantastic, but that's not the only way. The Tibetan tradition is sort of like putting yourself in the middle of the craziness. I remember hearing a story about a monk who was traveling around and just couldn't find a good place to meditate. And his attendants were trying really hard. And finally, they just kind of gave up and they went back home, landed in this busy airport. I think it was Calcutta. And as soon as he went off the plane, it's like, now I can meditate. Because he was in his energy source, all the craziness. So I love that story. So if we're not ready to go to the mountains and meditate in the cave, then we can practice where we are right now. And even if we're not qualified to practice Tantra, the teachers of this time and age have decided to share those teachings anyway. So even though they're referred to as secret teachings, we can find lots of books about them. We have a whole class about it here at Kadampa Center. There's a whole class about Tantra. So that was unthinkable in ancient times when it was much more secretive practice and teachings weren't as widely available. And I remember an explanation of that. I can't remember which teacher it was. I think it was the Dalai Lama or maybe Lama Yeshe. I shouldn't try to speculate, but one of the well-known teachers explained that because Westerners in particular are so good with thinking in terms of technical aspects and logical thinking and sort of like the STEM stuff, science and math, that Tantra can get very intricate. And if we learn conceptually about Tantra, even if we have none of these prerequisites whatsoever, we can still create very powerful positive imprints about the process itself by going through the visualizations that we would use and, the underlying motivation and the concepts involved. And that if we have the right motivation, being positive, something like, the compassion, love, all the good things like that, then if we combine that motivation with just simply a conceptual understanding and a technical aspect of that understanding, then that's still incredibly valuable. So the teachers here made a decision to go ahead and open it up to us. So, and that's one of the things that comes up also in the concept of precious human rebirth, that it's sort of like a bonus, that not only are we born as human, but they say it's incredibly rare to be born as a human in a time where there's Tantra, like where the concept actually exists, where teachers will share it at all. So, so as much as we have this low self-esteem, I've heard lots of teachings that remind us that there are a lot of ways in which we're totally amazing and have the perfect conditions here. That we're human, we have Tantra available, we can create powerful imprints. And they say that, learning about Tantra and developing the right kinds of attitude with teachers can be very powerful ways of sort of resuming where you left off in the next life. You can create very powerful karma to be reborn in a place that's conducive to Dharma practice with just sort of a second nature that is attracted to it. And we need that because until we get a hold of the death process and gain enough familiarity to sort of be aware of it as it happens, we don't have a whole lot of control over our rebirth. I guess I'm sort of shifting into the review portion here, but all these concepts are definitely related. And we have 3 verses about Tantra that we could read in the Foundation of All Good Qualities as well. So first, though, are there any questions about that? Yeah, someone mind giving a mic? Thanks, CJ.
I have a couple questions. One is you mentioned different deities. And I just would love to like look up a list and like learn more about them. What would I want to look up those?
That's a good question. I can't think of a resource for,
Thinking
I
like
mean, I can think
Wikipedia
of book titles, but I don't know of any books that I, know well enough to recommend or not. But I guess maybe whatever textbooks are used in the Tantra class here at the center, those would be great places to start, because those have certainly been vetted. And, they're not only considered to be authentic, but they're also consistent with our tradition here at Kadampa Center, which is sort of a subdivision of Tibetan Buddhism. So if you're interested in doing more things at the center, then it might make sense to sort of do something in the same tradition. Nothing wrong with shopping around and having variety and everything like that. There are interesting discussions about that too. But if you really think about it, ultimately to get really far with something, you kind of have to specialize. You kind of have to make some decisions like, well, how am I going to do this? And you can't really practice multiple methods at once, especially when they have different instructions. So there are probably different types of books you can find and with different purposes. I think also asking one of the teachers here is a great way to start too. They could give much better advice than someone like me who's not a teacher. And as a reminder, I think I hopefully clarified it in the first section, but I'm an instructor, not a teacher. And I think even the word instructor is generous. Basically, what it is that those of us who have been here a long time and been to lots of teachings are up here at the front of the class trying to share what we've learned and what we've reviewed, hoping it will be beneficial and that the lessons themselves will come through, because it's certainly not coming from my mind and my direct experience. But anyway, teachers are fantastic here. And Geshe Gelik is a wonderful teacher, of course. He's the resident teacher. Geshe Sangpo is another resident teacher. Venerable Tendrom will be teaching starting next Sunday, or this coming Sunday, I believe. And she's a very high level nun, and in my opinion, a lot more special than she might appear. That even though she doesn't get the title of Lama and things like that, or Geshe, then she's an incredible teacher who has taken high level vows. Like there are multiple levels of nun vows, and she's taken ones that are very difficult to find. There's a higher set of vows that it said that if you can keep those vows, it's much more powerful practice, and you're just naturally much more beneficial around others. And she has those. What else? Anybody else have ideas? Has anybody else read up on Tantra or heard some teachings that you thought were really good? Or deities? I guess it wasn't Tantra necessarily that you were asking about. It was the deities, right? So like the imagery, or are you wondering like sort of about which qualities which deities have, that sort of thing?
Like names of deities and what they're associated with.
Okay. Well, I think we could at least in the room come up with some examples that we've heard here at the center. Like what would be a deity that we talk about a lot here at the center? Anybody want to mention one? Get the mic to Chris, please.
Green Tara, that's one. Where to look that up? But
No,
that one,
what quality do you think you
that one
associate with that?
definitely, that one definitely means action,
Hmm.
I think. Yeah.
Yeah, that's my understanding too. I think sometimes the word power might be used along with it too.
Removing
Mhm.
obstacles. I've heard that associated with
Yes.
green therapy.
Another aspect I think they talk a lot about would be protection from fear, or overcoming fear. So like one of the phrases in one of the prayers about Tara is liberates from the 8 fears. So fears have a list too. Seems like everything has a list. So there's a wonderful prayer about the different types of fears that Tara can liberate us from by practicing. So, maybe if you wouldn't mind getting the mic to her. So, thanks.
So I know there's that prayer on Sunday. Sorry, I'm like totally taking us off track here, but I know
No, we're
there's
not
that-
off track at all. I think this is right on topic, actually.
I know there's a prayer that they say on Sundays where I can't remember, it's in the book, but they define 3 things. It's like Tare liberates from different things. Yeah, it's this. It's for the benefit of all beings. So these are like deities that are being described. They're not just like concepts. I've always wondered like who are these? You know what I mean?
Would you mind reading the prayer so that we can all be on the same page with it? Or is it a long prayer?
Ture liberates from cyclic existence. Tutare liberates from the 8 fears. Ture liberates from all sickness. I prostrate to the liberator, Mother Tara.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, so you're asking about maybe the words at the beginning, like ture, tutare.
Yeah.
Those are parts of the Tara's mantra.
Okay.
So that's what they mean in that context.
Right.
So,
Okay.
and I don't know if I've heard it directly, but if anyone here can support the idea, I think those syllables are just sort of represent those concepts.
Okay. Okay.
Not necessarily in the literal translation of the sense, but practicing Tara is about sort of associating those particular syllables with those ideas.
Okay.
So
That clears it up. Thank you.
and it said that mantra in general is practiced because it's thought to just be especially powerful. It's hard to understand why, and they say that it's hard to explain why as well, but that popular mantras are chosen for that very reason, that there's just something about saying that particular set of syllables that they say, regardless of where you are in your practice or your motivation or the context, like just the syllables themselves have some power. So that's why they're done a lot here. That's the reason that I've heard explained, and that's the prayer I think that we recite before we do 7 Tara mantras sometimes here at the center. So. Any other deities that people remember coming up here?
I like Medicine Buddha. Yeah,
That's a wonderful one.
had the Medicine Buddha or the healing retreat with the Medicine Buddha mandala and everything recently.
Yeah, and is that?
Yeah.
Let's see.
It's a-
Oh, that's
the big
Medicine Buddha, the blue one.
yeah.
Okay. Yes. So that's
The big
nice
Buddha.
big picture of Medicine Buddha. And yeah, so that's as the name might imply, the Buddha for healing. And as CJ said, we had a retreat about a month ago, I think, 1 or 2 months ago, where we had a special sand mandala created here. Did any of you happen to attend that over here? Okay. Oh, cool. I bet they'll do it again. I think they're wanting to make it into an annual tradition.
Yeah, it's
So-
annual. I think the most recent one was the 2nd annual, but they are definitely planning to do it annually now.
Yeah, and Medicine Buddha is also recommended a lot in the sense of helping a dying person. So the Medicine Buddha practice is very powerful near the time of death, both mentally and physically. So it's both kinds of healing. Any others? Deities? Okay. Yep.
I always liked Ganesh, but I think a lot of that is just because I like animals. So
Ganesh, she said?
Yeah.
Is that the one that
Ganesha.
sort of looks like an elephant? Or
is that it?
oh, do we have a
I can't tell. I'm blind.
yeah, do we have a statue of or picture of Ganesh somewhere here? Or didn't realize. But, yeah, Lisa mentioned it's traditionally Hindu in origin, but I've also heard that there's a Buddhist version as well, so that both religions like to use Ganesh as a deity. So I'm not knowledgeable at all on the differences, but yeah, Ganesh is a great a great example. I don't know if it comes up a lot in practices here, but like when I went on a pilgrimage, one of the pilgrimage sites was sort of like a carving of Ganesh in a rock, and so we went a long way just to see that, and it was a Buddhist pilgrimage, so I can at least cite that from experience. And let's see, Vajrasattva, I think, is a really big one in terms of purification. And Vajrasattva's here. Actually, he's there with consort as a way that they would describe the male and the female both being there. They would describe that as Vajrasattva with consort, sort of like visualizing the two deities together as a representation of enlightenment. And in particular, Vajrasattva's specialty is purifying negative karma. And that's done in a practice called the Four Opponent Powers that I think we mentioned briefly in one of our previous classes. But that's a practice that's very frequently encouraged here, like at the center, at other centers that are in the same family of Buddha centers, at some of the retreats that they've had and so forth. It's a very common practice to do in the evening in a context where you sort of go through the day. Practice called the Four Opponent Powers is about going through the day, thinking about things you wish you would have done differently, reminding yourself what your refuge is, like where are you looking to for something to address this, and reciting Vajrasattva's mantra, which is they have a long version that's 100 syllables that you can recite that, or a short version, Om Vajrasattva Hum, like however many syllables that is. So that's a short version that can be used as well. And then on the final step in that Four Opponent Powers process would be to make a resolution of something to change to address the thing that you regretted in the first step. So that practice is very common, I think, at a certain point in practice. Like if you're really looking for something to do that involves a deity, that's a very common recommendation I hear. And we can get 35 deities at once. And this tanka here is called the 35 Buddhas. And that's a purification practice that's commonly recommended here for the mornings. And that's said to be purifying lots of different things and over a longer period of time. Like not that they're both limited to what they purify, but sort of the focus of the practice is different in the two cases. So this is a part of a practice called the prostrations to the 35 Buddhas. And so I think we can count each of those 35 Buddhas as a deity as well. So that and Vajrasattva are the practices that come to mind to me to be some of the most recommended ones here. So yeah, I guess I did sort of get into the daily practice section. So we've finished the Tantra section. Okay, yes, 6 minutes left. CJ reminded me. Yeah. So instead of reading prayer, if you wish, you can certainly read the verses. And well, actually, I guess we should finish if you guys wouldn't mind. Maybe at the end we can read the last few verses together. First, I want to make sure we answer all the questions. Maybe I can cover the rest of daily practice pretty quickly. And in fact, the Vajrasattva and 35 Buddhas is the main two things that I was planning on talking about in terms of this thing called the daily practice. But if we want to sort of back up to square one, when Venerable Amy teaches this course, she talks about a wonderful practice to start with being trying to cultivate a habit of your first thought being the morning being, I'm alive. And then the second thought being, I'm going to make this day meaningful. So just that can be a really powerful practice. And let's see, so then there's Vajrasattva and prostrations of 35 Buddhas. And Venerable Amy also talks about after recalling those two things, I'm alive and I'll make this day meaningful, then you can practice recalling that throughout the day. So throughout the day, just practicing thinking like, wow, I'm still alive. And how am I doing making things meaningful today? And of course, you could, add things to the practice if you want. You can think of specific ways you want to make each particular day meaningful. I think we've about covered all the stuff that I had written down about daily practice here. Those are the concepts that tend to come up a lot, I think. Let's see, what else would there be? Yeah, that's all I made in my notes. And anybody else want to volunteer an idea that something you do in your own practice or something that you've heard of described or something I'm forgetting? Oh. Yeah, there's certainly no one formula that needs to be followed. And I think maybe the answer to the question, like what kind of daily practice is good for me or what's a good daily practice? Often I hear the answer like, well, work on your mind. Like whatever you think you can do to help work on your mind, take advantage of your strengths, your inclinations, whatever practice appeals to you the most, go for it. So that's a great sort of general purpose answer that I hear given a lot to that. And if you want to sort of ask more formally, then sometimes people will ask a qualified teacher for a recommendation of a particular practice. And a lot of times the teacher will give a good recommend. Well, it's not a lot of times it's good. A lot of times the teacher will reply with a specific practice, which the idea being if they're a qualified teacher, then that practice is probably the absolute best for you to be doing. And part of being a qualified teacher is for the teacher to know that, to sense that about you somehow. I have no idea how, but there's a phrase for that called skillful means. I can't remember if I've mentioned that before. But a teacher with skillful means can give great advice on a practice. And Lama Zopa Rinpoche was famous for having really intense practices. So people were advised to be very careful for asking him for advice for a practice. It's best to sort of narrow it down, like Lama Zopa Rinpoche, between these two things, what would you recommend? If unless you're ready for doing anything, in which case, by all means, go for it. I mean, Venerable Amy herself, when she teaches this course, sometimes mentions having asked Lama Zopa Rinpoche for advice. And she asked it before she got that disclaimer and before anybody warned her. And if I remember it, I think she ended up going to Malaysia, spending some time in other countries and just having this huge long list of things to do that she said, of course, she was terrified at first. She says that I can't do this. Like, what have I done? But I think we can, if any of you have seen Venerable Amy give teachings by any chance, she does come here to this center every once in a while. I think she's just kind of watching her give teachings is proof of the pudding that practice worked, because she's just a lovely teacher. And yeah, great reminder. She actually wrote the book that this Buddhism in a Nutshell course is based on. So if she can manage it, we can too, I think. So at least from the stories I've heard of where she says that she started, she talks about sometimes in her teachings being in terrible relationships, miserable, blaming other people for her problems, like all the same struggles that we have too. And she found her way through Buddhism to really be inspired and get to a place where she inspires so many people now. So lots of examples of that. Any other questions, comments? So.
Question online. Jennifer, you got a
wonderful.
question? Oh, sorry,
Jennifer.
just unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, not really a question, but in terms of daily practice, when the monks walked through the area and really taught, today is my peaceful day, and that's become like a morning mantra. And then if I find myself getting dysregulated or irritated, or when I watch the news, I repeat 3 times, today will be my peaceful day, with a breath with each of those. And it really just centers and grounds me. And so that's been a really positive daily practice for me.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Are those the walk for peace? The monks that did that? Oh, oh, that's awesome. So, all right. So I guess maybe we can close here. It's right at 9 o'clock. I thought it might be nice to finish the prayer that we started. So I have heard some teachers say that it's auspicious to finish prayers when you start them. So especially given we're all here together reciting it, I think that would be a great practice. So page, I think it's 95. Is that where we were? Yeah. So if you turn to in the gold prayer book, and Lisa will be sharing it to page 95. So it would be about a third of the way down the page after the one we have already recited. So having become is the place that we start. So I think we're going to do 3 verses that refer to Tantra, and then a couple verses that sort of bring things home and have some conclusion and a dedication at the end of the prayer. So, okay, so starting with having become, let's recite together. Having become a pure vessel by training in the general path, please bless me to enter the holy gateway of the fortunate ones, the supreme Vajra vehicle. At that time, the basis of accomplishing the 2 attainments is keeping pure vows and samaya. As I have become firmly convinced of this, please bless me to protect these vows and pledges like my life. Then, having realized the importance of the 2 stages, the essence of the Vajrayana, by practicing with great energy, never giving up the 4 sessions, please bless me to realize the teachings of the Holy Guru. Like that, may the gurus who show the noble path and the spiritual friends who practice it have long lives. Please bless me to pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. And all my lives, never separated from perfect gurus, may I enjoy the magnificent Dharma. By completing the qualities of the stages and paths, may I quickly attain the state of Vajradhara. All right, well, thank you, everybody. By the way, that last word, Vajradhara, maybe we should clarify that a little bit. There are lots of terms in those verses that we could get into, but Vajradhara is the deity that's kind of the central deity in Tantra practice. Even though you could do Tantra practice with any deity, a lot of the practices within Tantra involve the deity named Vajradhara. And I always like to think back to Venerable Rubina telling the story in her teachings that she asked Lama Yeshe, who she sees as her main teacher, who Vajradhara was. And Lama Yeshe said, "It's the biggest Buddha, dear." So that was that answer. So if you're wondering who Vajradhara is, that's one perspective on that definition of that deity. So, all right. So I guess we've done part of a dedication just by reciting that prayer. I think those last few verses are kind of great for a dedication, and maybe getting them a little out of order, because I think the convention is to start a dedication with sort of your own personal aspect of it. Like, well, what would I like to have this positive karma create someday? And as a reminder, I know I've said this before, but I don't think it can be said enough that this practice is said to be incredibly powerful and incredibly rare. It takes a lot of effort. So the fact that we've all done it is reason for a lot of rejoicing. I've heard a lot of teachers who know their stuff and who have a wonderful reputation. I've heard a lot of them say that with a lot of confidence. So I think we have a lot of energy going for that belief. So anyway, so you can think of your personal way that you'd like to kind of spend that positive energy when it ripens as positive karma at some point in the future. And whatever that motivation is, you can stretch it to the ones like the ones we read about. Achieving the full state of enlightenment and benefiting all sentient beings, practicing the teachings perfectly, all those kinds of things. We can include that in our dedication as well. So, well, I wish all of you good luck. And if you'd like to continue your studies, then next week is an introduction to mindfulness, or in 2 weeks, sorry.
We're off
Yeah,
next
so we're
week,
off next
and then
week.
the following
2 weeks,
Tuesday.
the same time, same place is going to be Introduction to Mindfulness. And Venerable Tendran, the nun that I recommended, who's fantastic, is going to be teaching the next 2 months worth of Sunday teachings. Lots of other stuff going on at the center too. You can check the website. I can't remember offhand all of it, but I very much enjoyed the class, and I think it's been very beneficial for me to try to listen to my own words. So thank you for giving me the chance, and I wish the best for all of you. So have a good night.
Thank you, John, for allowing us all to create merit by listening to the Dharma and just Buddhism in a nutshell. Yeah, great. Thank you so much. All right. Good night, everyone. Hope to see you all for mindfulness in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. Good night, online people.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Okay, good night. Thank you.